Okay, I believe it is recorded now. So welcome,
Yep.
Joe. Very glad that you have accepted this sudden invitation, to be honest. It's great pleasure to speak to you today. The purpose of the call is purely educational, to encourage our students to read also your book in the area of operational excellence, Lean and Six Sigma. You are the author of that book, State of Readiness. I will put some details about this book into description field under the video. So, Joe, the first question. I know that you are the boss for yourself, but if you are tasked to write the book once again, and I understand this book was published almost 6 years ago, before pandemic time. Would you like to consider any new bits in your operational excellence model, or the basis you think is still okay and will need any updates? What is your view after this huge experience?
Thank you for that. It's eventually you have to release your book to get published, right? And if most authors had their druthers, they would never release because they would always be refining and refining and refining. So, would I change parts of the book or update parts of the book? Certainly. In fact, I've already dedicated myself to writing a second book, which picks up where the previous one left off. The book I wrote was rather holistic. It was about concepts and ideas and what good looks like. How we can organize people and their talents and the apparatus to some common outcome, to some common aspiration and goal. My next book is going to be much more prescriptive. It's going to be more of a how-to. Now that you understand it, this is how you do it. And so it'll probably be another 2 years before it comes out, God willing. But that would be the changes I would make to the first book. It'd be to much more prescriptive.
Good to know, Joe. I will be the one, probably the first one who will buy it, definitely. Okay. Um, Going into details, now I want to refer to your operational excellence enterprise readiness model you have proposed in your work. And it ends basically with the golden state. So
Yes.
how do you treat the golden state? Is it rather something philosophical like Toyota's True North, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Or it is really a state, a certain point in time that you measure your performance and you say, this is exactly what I wanted to achieve. This is the excellence. And the second question related to the golden state, based on your experience with many companies you worked with, how many years it takes to reach to achieve the golden state? Or you are telling me this statistics doesn't make sense because of many different influences?
Well, if you examine, my readiness model, you'll see that it cuts across the entirety of the organization. If we look at disciplines like Lean and Six Sigma, they're very process oriented. In other words, optimizing processes. But we have to think about processes coming together, a collection of processes that are oriented to a common outcome as a system. And you have a collection of systems, and that defines the organization. So really, the operational excellence readiness model is about organizational design. How does an organization work better as an organization? So, certain pillars of the organization, of any organization, are naturally associated with one another, such as production. We'll pick on production. You have logistics, you have supply chain, you have production, you have design engineering. But then another pillar might be sales and marketing. Those two worked closely together, along with maybe credit functions of finance. So if we start coagulating these various business functions, then and getting them to work better together, then you reach a level what I'll call bronze. All right. And then if we start thinking about the organization, how we integrate the organization, this is not to be confused with everybody learning everybody else's job, but just being aware of everybody else's jobs and business functions and where the integration points are. And once we achieve that level, that I determined to be the silver level. And we prove out the silver level in we'll call it simulations. Take a pond. I'll use an analogy of the pond. We've all seen a nice pond, very early in the morning, and it's like glass, right? It's like a mirror, and it's nice and still. And along is going to come some child, and it's going to throw a rock in that pond. Now, wherever that rock hits, is going to be a lot of kinetic energy that's released. But eventually, the ripple will infect the entirety of the pond. So we have to think of our organizations as that pond. Everything's working all well and good until some kid throws a rock, and we don't know where in that organization it's going to hit. But when it hits, that organization has to be able to react as an organization. So to achieve the gold level, that's actually a retrospective. You can only prepare for it in the silver level, but at the gold level, you've endured a rock being thrown and hitting your organization, and then you do the debrief as to how did our organization react? Where were the weak points? So the gold level isn't something you aspire to as much as you prepare for, and the test is when you're actually called to task.
Okay. How much time then to get?
Well, it could take forever, right? That comes down to alignment and commitment. One of the challenges I see in OpEx programs and continuous improvement programs is they don't know what they stand for. Sometimes it's about cost reduction, but more often it's about something else. When the pandemic hit, I spoke to about 120 or so directors of CI OpEx or former directors of CI and OpEx. And there was one gentleman in particular I spoke with, and I asked him, who's out of job. I asked him, what was the growth strategy for the business? And he responded that they're growing by acquisition. I said, super. How much of your effort was devoted to the acquisition process? Like post-acquisition integration. And he said none. So this is a problem with OpEx and CI. Oftentimes, we don't know what's important. And what's important changes from time to time. And we have to make sure that we're aligned to that. And it's not always a given. And so that, when we talk about, how long will it take? A lot of it comes down to how important is it to the stratification of the organization. I was working with one company in the UK, and I asked each of the directors what were their three most important strategic initiatives they're working on this year. And only two of them said operational excellence, okay? Which means that it was not important to the other seven, okay? Now, this is not good or bad. It just goes to how far and how fast. The more people in leadership that we have supporting the effort, the further and the faster it'll go. If we have very limited support, it's going to take a long time.
Okay, understand. Okay, case dependent. Okay.
Case dependent.
Okay, Joe. Okay, going back to the writings on operational excellence, I would like to a little bit organize the terminology. I'm sorry for the scientific approach. Everything started in scientific work from the Porter's famous article, What is Strategy? And for the first time, he described their operational effectiveness. It's exactly what you call today operational excellence. But then I see still many different authors writing about world-class manufacturing, separately about Lean, Six Sigma, that kind of stuff. And even in your book, I have found one chapter concerning Lean and Six Sigma, but this is pretty small chapter. So uh, from the practitioner's perspective, I would rather expect a book consisting all the building blocks, because I understand, that is my understanding, the operational excellence is like an umbrella for all the initiatives. So how does it happen in that way? That is it a kind of standardization problem or related to the specific experience of the authors, that not all bits are included?
Yeah, so with operational excellence or Lean Six Sigma or manufacturing excellence, or pick your title or label. These are not laws of nature. These are not laws of physics. These are ideas and laws or rules, made by people, and being made by people, they could be bent and broken by people. I think that personally, the biggest risk to any of these initiatives is that people get married to a book, so much, or a concept so much that they have blinkers on and they can't see laterally. So this is a very dangerous predicament a lot of companies get into. They get married to a book, or they get married to a company like Toyota, for instance. Toyota is a world-class company. Don't make no mistake. But there are other world-class companies in different industries. So we have to think about excellence. What does excellence mean? It means being as good as you can be. Right. And, Michael Porter is of course, a brilliant person. And, when he talks about operational effectiveness, it's very, very similar, I think, to operational excellence. Maybe excellence is something a little bit more of a objective than efficiencies. Efficiencies might be something that can be measured, whereas excellence is something to more aspire to. Maybe that's a differentiator there. But when we talk about operational excellence, we're talking about the umbrella, and I like the way that you said that. It's operational excellence is about the entirety of the organization. I was speaking just recently with a company, and they weren't, the gentleman I was speaking with was in quality. And he made the comment that quality doesn't have anything to do with operational excellence, according to his company. And I was like, how can that be? Everything within the organization. In fact, I would even go further and say everything in the value chain, from the customer's customer to the vendor's vendor, is all part of an organization's, operational excellence initiatives. Of course, the further away from the organization you get, the less fidelity and control you have. But it is those activities are going to influence the performance of your organization. So you can't just assume that everything's going to work. And we saw that with the disruptions in the supply chain. But getting back to some of these other disciplines, if you don't have a mastery of improving processes, you're not going to be able to understand how to improve your systems, and you're not going to be able to understand how to improve your organization as a whole. So the basic fundamental building blocks is in process improvement. And whether you use, DMAIC or PDCA or Toyota quality wheels or whatever gets you there, it doesn't matter as long as you are a master of it. But then once you have a proficiency in improving processes, then you have to go beyond. And this is not to say that every process has to be optimized before you move on, because every process will never be optimized. There's always room for improvement. But you have to have a mastery of the discipline before you move on.
Okay, thanks for the key statement about it. Another added value I have found in your book is that you proposed to use to improve business decision-making process by using a method taken from the military. How did you get this, the idea, and how it can be applied? I'm referring to the OODA loop, of course.
Yeah, we call it the OODA loop. The OODA loop is something that I've been exposed to from an early age, probably since my Boy Scout days. And at that time, I was very much into aviation. It's probably a theme that goes through my book on occasion. I used to write NASA when I was like in fourth grade. I used to write NASA, and I used to get all these, pictures of EVAs and mission patches and stuff. It was really cool, and that's when I got exposed to the OODA loop. And I've carried it forward because I see all too often that organizations are looking for perfection when good is good enough. The reason that the football net is bigger than the ball is because close enough is good enough. If the net was just a little bit bigger than the ball, of course there'd be no scoring whatsoever. So I think that people have to make decisive decision quicker, which actually is very similar to the agile approach. If your students and the audience is familiar with the agile approach, it's very, very similar, except the agile came out of software development. But the two approaches are very, very, very similar. I would say that probably the only main difference, is that the OODA loop is focused more on strategy, execution, whereas the agile approach is incremental steps towards an objective.
Okay. Thanks for the comment, Joe. We already touched the problem, and I know the answer, but it's important that you will tell it us once again. What is your definition of operational excellence?
Okay, so I have a drawn out definition in my book, but I'm going to try to make it much more succinct. Operational excellence is when an organization is working its best as an organization. And of course, we have to be aligned to the corporate strategies. The people and the resources involved, the supply chain involved has to be aligned to the corporate strategies, which also means that those corporate strategies have to be known. Okay, a corporate strategy that's not communicated cannot be aligned to. It also requires commitment on the part of the company to support the people, and the people to support the company. And lastly, it is about the people. If you don't support your people, if you set them up for failure, and I refer to setting up for failure, somebody that is got accountability and responsibility, but no authority. So if you ever find yourself in that situation, you're being set up for failure. But it's like, we have to understand what is important to the people. And what is important to the employees is not necessarily what the leadership thinks is important to the employees. I'll give you an example. I was working in Philadelphia. This is some years ago, and the manufacturer was in an undesirable section of town. I'll call it an underdeveloped section of town. And they employed a disproportionate number of single mothers. A lot of the employees there were single mothers, and absenteeism was a gigantic problem. And they're trying to figure out, how do we make it so that absenteeism isn't a problem anymore? And they started with the stick. Of course, if you miss work or you're late 3 times, you're fired. That doesn't seem to motivate everybody else. And they started incenting with money, and the money didn't help either, because the root cause of the problem was that these mothers couldn't afford daycare. They're paying so little that they couldn't afford daycare, so they had to rely on friends and family to watch their children for them to go to work. And if the child was sick or the babysitter wasn't available, they missed work. So my suggestion, since they had some extra real estate there in the manufacturing or the building itself, I said, why don't you put daycare here? Why don't you just put in a daycare center right here? You'll be able to handle the 40 or so kids that might be in there with a couple of trained professional caregivers instead of friends and family. And guess what? The absenteeism problem virtually vanished after they did that. So we have to think about what's important to the people from their perspective, being empathetic. So, just to summarize that bit of a diatribe, what is operational excellence? It's having a company that knows its vision of the future, having all of its resources aligned to the pursuit of that vision, having the company support and commit to the resources in order to help deliver that division ambition, and lastly, to make sure that the people are properly outfitted and cared for so that they can perform at their peak ability without distraction.
Okay. Happy to learn from you about this social community-oriented initiatives, Joe. One bonus question, please.
Okay.
You already mentioned about Toyota, but when we look today at latest headlines about the huge product recalls they have, and also, to be honest, about the scandalic situation in Daihatsu. Daihatsu is already a part of Toyota. A bold question arises. Is Toyota production system ending? Or Toyota needs alignment you mentioned before?
Well, I think part of the problem, and we're also seeing it with Boeing right now, once you start subcontracting out your production of key components, then you're also hoping, for lack of a better term, or relying upon your subcontractor, your contractors, your suppliers, to have as much enthusiasm for perfection as you do. And as soon as those things are out of your control, the opportunity for missteps occur. So I think that I personally think that Toyota has to start, and all companies have to start thinking about their supply chain and how they can better control their supply chain. You think about, if we go back to the history of automobiles, whether it was in Japan or the United States or elsewhere, when companies first started making their automobiles, the entire supply chain was within a 2-hour drive of the plant. Now our supply chains are scattered across the world. And the further they go, the less fidelity, the less accurate the information is going back and forth. The actual cost goes up because we have to double check. We have to put our own inspectors online. There's a lot of things that go on because of that. So I think that Toyota, like every company, has to evolve. Otherwise, they're going to be left behind. I mean, the landscape is littered with companies that have been at the top of their game and then failed. I mean, we just think about Nokia, BlackBerry, or Research in Motion, and Kodak for 3. Even IBM was on the precipice of death in the early 1990s, only saved by Lou Gerstner. So, evolves. Then they will thrive. And if they don't, then they won't.
Yeah, a very interesting time for Toyota, definitely.
Indeed.
Okay, Joseph, thank you very much for this call. I would like to once again recommend your book for all students to read this. We are waiting for the second one.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It was great. And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we wish you a very good stay in Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you.